Hello guys, this is part 115 of ASP.NET video series. In this video, we will discuss about solving the problems of ASP.NET Composite Custom Calendar Control. That we have been working with from part 112 to 114. If you have not watched these videos, I strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with this session. So if you remember, the composite custom calendar control that we have developed has several issues. For example, look at this. When the control first renders, look at this. When the control first renders, we don't want this calendar to be visible. We want to hide this. Okay, this is one of the problem. So let's see how to hide control. Let's see how to hide the calendar. Control is first loaded. So how to hide the calendar when the custom calendar control is first loaded? And to do that, it is pretty simple. So let's flip to custom calendar, custom controls project. Let's flip to custom control project. If you remember, we have the create child controls method. We have create child control method, which is actually responsible for creating the child controls. You know, the text box, image button, and the calendar. So within that method, we actually need to hide the calendar when we are creating it. So here we have the calendar object. We are assigning the ID to that, and all I have to do here is, when I render that, I want to turn the visibility to false. So calendar.visible is equal to false. Okay, when it initially renders, so that is the first problem. So solving first problem is pretty much easier. Hiding the calendar control when the custom calendar control is first loaded. How do we do that? All we have to do is set the visible property of the calendar object to false in create child control method. All right, So what is the second problem? We have displaying and hiding the calendar when the image button is clicked. So at the moment, if you look at the behavior, if you look at the behavior of this custom calendar control, now the calendar is already shown, and then clicking on this button has no effect. It simply posts back to the server, but really does not do anything. Okay, so initially when this control loads up, the calendar should be invisible. When I click this image button, then the calendar should become visible. If I click this image button again, then the calendar should become invisible. Basically, on the click of this image button, the visibility of the calendar should be toggled. If it is displayed, you have to hide it. If it is hidden, you have to display it. Okay, to do that, the first step is to actually generate the event handler for that image button. So again, back to the custom control project. And if you look at the create child controls method, okay, here we are rendering the image button. I mean, we are creating the image button. So now we basically want to associate an event handler method to the click event of the image button. So image button dot click. So image button dot click. So image button dot click. So when I click, when this click event is raised, when this click event is raised on this button, when this click event is raised on this button, image button, we want to associate an event handler method. And how do we do that? We hook up the event handler to the events of a control using delegates. We have discussed about events and delegates in the previous sessions of this ASP.NET video series. If you have not watched them, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with this video. Alright. So to hook up the event handler, I use plus equal, and then look at that. The Visual Studio will show you the intelligence. Now that's showing only the event handler method, image button underscore click, but we write first new image click event handler delegate, new image click event handler delegate, and in this we pass event handler method named event handler method image button underscore click. That is the method which we have to implement. Now, how to implement this method? Go to the suggestion. Here is the generate method image button click handler method. Double click at it. So here is our there is the code snippet generated for us. So click at the we have our image button underscore click event method there. So now we need to control the visibility. Now we need to control the visibility of the calendar within the click of this button. So all you need to do is, if the calendar object, if it is visible, what we want to do, we want to turn off the visibility. So set the visibility of the calendar. So visible property is itself Boolean property. If the calendar object, if it is visible, calendar object is visible, what we want to do, we want to turn off the visibility. Calendar dot, so visible property is itself Boolean property. So if it is true, then we know that the calendar is visible. In that case, we want turn off the visibility. Else we want to turn on the visibility. So calendar.visible is equal to true. So that should solve our second problem. Displaying and hiding the calendar when the image button is clicked. So if it is displayed, displayed, it will be hidden, otherwise it will be displayed back. Okay, so what is the third problem? Populating the text box control with a date that is selected from the calendar. So at the moment, you look at this, I have the calendar control visible here, but when I select date, basically nothing happens. But what should happen in reality, whatever date the user selects here, that selected date should be populated within the text box control. Let's see how to do that. Again, if we have to do that, then we have to first associate an event handler for this selection changed event of the calendar control. So then we have to first associate an event handler for this selection changed event of the calendar control. We do it the same way as we have done it for the image button control. So I have the calendar control here. I have the calendar control here. So calendar dot selection changed. Selection changed. That is the event. And to that, let's associate an event handler method calendar underscore selection changed. So this is the calendar underscore selection changed event handler method. So first we need to write the event handler delegate and then pass this calendar underscore selection changed event handler method. So new event handler, pass in the event handler method calendar underscore selection changed. Event handler method. So we need to, so what we need to do here to implement this event handler method, how to generate it, implement it, generate the, double click at this suggestion, and that if we click this suggestion, then this will automatically generate code snippet for us. So here is the code snippet for us, the event handler method. And in this method, what we need to do, basically when the date is selected within the calendar control, we need to populate that, into the text box control. And to do that, I already have some code typed here. So let's go to Notepad and copy this piece of code. And paste it here. So let's copy and paste that code here, there. So what are we doing here? We are retrieving the selected date. We are retrieving the selected date, property of the calendar object, property of the calendar object, and then converting that to short date string, and then setting that as the text, and then setting that as the text for the text box control. It is as simple as that. And finally, we also need to turn off the visibility. Okay, turn off the visibility. Okay. So when I select date, a date from the calendar control, that date should be populated within the text box control, and this calendar should become invisible. That is done by these two lines here. That is done by these two lines here. So that should solve our third problem as well, and that should solve our third problem as well. And what is the final problem? We should be able to retrieve the selected date from the custom calendar control when we use that on a web form. Okay. retrieving the selected date from the custom calendar control on a web form. Now at the moment, if you look at this, calendar control, we are using this calendar control on the web form. So now at the moment, if you look at this, calendar control, we are using this calendar control on the web form 9.axpx. Now let's say, for example, I have a button control. Let's drag and drop it from here. The button control. Drag and drop the button control from the toolbox onto the web form. Now when I double click this button control, we have the event handler generated. So double click this button control. We have this event handler generated. If you look at this custom calendar control, if you look at this custom calendar control, the idea of that one is custom calendar 1. The idea of this one is custom calendar 1. Now if I go onto the code behind page, now and then if I try to retrieve, let's say for example, when I select a date, in the calendar, it is populated in the text box control. Now let's say I want to retrieve that selected date from this calendar control on a web form. Okay, on a web form. So now does this calendar control, so now this calendar control has any property which exposes the selected date? It does not have it. So in the button, means, so now does this calendar control, so now this calendar control does have any property which exposes the selected date? It does not have it. So in the button control, when I say calendar 1 dot, I don't have a property that can return the selected value from the control. So we need to expose a property that returns the selected date. So wherever we are using, we can use that property to retrieve the selected date from that particular control. So let's go ahead and add selected date property. So let's go ahead and add selected date property. So let's go ahead and add selected date property to the calendar control. So let's copy this. Let's go to the notepad. Go to the notepad and copy this. Okay, this is the selected date property. And if you remember, in the previous sessions we discussed about image button, image URL property. So it is very much similar, to that property. So let me paste this property here, and then we will go through the code. So go to the custom calendar file and paste it, the copied code here. So if you look at the property, the name of the property is selected date. Now we know that a date is a date time data type. Now the name of the property is selected date. Now we know that a date is a date time data type. So the data type is date time. So it returns date time data type, and look at this, we have the category, and look at this, we have the category attribute and description attribute. You know what these attributes are for. We discuss about them when we are discussing about image button, image URL property. The category will be the category under which this property will be displayed, whereas description will be the description, basically which appears when the property is selected in the properties window. All right, so this property has got get set accessor. Now what should this property do? Basically this property should be able to return the value that the user has selected. So if you look at this, obviously we have to call this ensure child control. Method. We have discussed about the signification of this method in the previous session of this video series. If you don't know what the purpose of this method is, I strongly recommend to watch those videos first. All right, so ensure child controls a call to that method, and then what are we doing here? Basically we are checking if there is any text at all in the text box. If there is a text in the text box, if it is not null or empty, then if it is basically null or empty, look at the we are using a conditional operator. Here. So if this expression evaluates to true, that means we know that in the text box we don't have any text there, in which case return the minimum date value. If somebody tries to retrieve, the property of that text box, of that control. Okay, otherwise if there is something within the text box, then what are we doing? We are converting that text into a date time and returning that back to the user. Okay, so basically that is the get accessor. And what should the set accessor do? So when somebody sets this value, the selected date a property, what should happen? Selected this value, the selected value, this value. If so, when somebody sets this value, the selected date a property, what should happen? We should take that value and populate that into the text box and populate that into the text box control. So if value is not equal to null, meaning somebody has set a value, then ensure there are child controls. And then set the text to, we are converting the value, to a short date string, and then setting it to the text property of the text box control. And then look at this, we are also setting, actually instead of selected a date, I will say visible date. And this is very important, because when you set a value within the text box control, and then when I click the image button, when the image button displays the calendar, the calendar should show the date that we have currently typed into the text box, okay, which is very much user friendly. Because if in the text box, let's say I have 1/1/1940, and then when I click on image button, when the calendar shows today's date, let's say for example 10/10/2024, and if the user has to navigate back to 1940, just imagine how many clicks he has to take. Okay, that is why whatever date that types into the text box control, if the calendar if you make the calendar visible at that point of time, make sure the calendar visible date is the date that the user has typed into the text box control. That is why we have this here. Okay, on the other hand, if the value is null, meaning I did not set anything, I have sent an empty value, a value or an empty string. In that case, look at that, we are setting it to empty string, but I am setting visible date, that is today, date time. So a very simple property with simple get and set accessor. Okay, so we have this control. Let's go ahead and rebuild the solution. So rebuild the custom control. Custom control calendar project. Rebuild the custom control calendar projects. So build succeeded. Now let's go back to the demo ASP.NET web application project, where we are testing this. So first thing, I am going to remove the references. To this assembly, and I am going to get rid of that custom calendar control. Calendar control. From there, And then from the toolbox, let's go ahead and remove that. So choose item and uncheck the custom calendar. Here is the custom calendar. Here it is. Okay. Alright, so that should remove that. And also, just to be safe, let me remove this from the project references. Build solution. And let's ensure we don't have this, in the bin folder. So we can see here is no custom calendar assembly there. Okay, so let's build the solution. Okay, once again see, is there any custom calendar DDL assembly? No. Okay, so build the solution once, and then build the solution once, and then let's go back to toolbox and re-add the assembly. So choose item, now choose item from the choose toolbox items. From the choose toolbox items dialog box, click the browser button, navigate to C drive, go to user folder, Dell, desktop, folder 112. Where is the folder 112? Part folder 112. Click this. Go to the inside the custom control folder, custom control object folder, then debug, and here is the our generated assembly custom controls DDL. So select this. So we have our custom calendar there. So okay, and drag and drop it, custom calendar. It should be here. So drag and drop the custom calendar here. Onto the web form. So I want the calendar. So I want the calendar to be visible there. And if you remember, within the solution explorer we have these images. folder which has got this calendar.jpg. So let's go ahead and set the property. So that property is image button, image URL that is present in images /calendar .jpg. So that should show the image immediately. So that should show the image immediately. Look at that. And look at this, we have the selected date property as well. Okay, now if I select a date, look at that, since the date, selected date is date time data type, Visual Studio is smart enough to show a calendar for the user to actually select a date rather than him typing it manually here. So I click on the drop down list, I get a calendar here, and I select 15th September 2024. Where is the 15? Here it is. And look at this, as soon as I have selected that value there, look at what happened to the control on the designer surface. It is immediately updated because we have a call to ensure. I mean we have that recreate child controls method. We have that recreate child method. We have overridden that. So recreate child controls method. This method updates the designer surface. Okay. So that is selected date. Let's go ahead and run this. So that is selected date. So let's go ahead and run this. So look at this. At the moment, as soon as we have added that control, look at that here. The first problem is solved. When the control initially loads up, the calendar is not visible. Now the calendar is not visible. Now the user click this image button. That is when the calendar is visible. Okay, if I click the image button, means if I click this, the calendar is visible. Okay, if I click the image button again, look at that, the calendar becomes invisible. If I click again, look at that, calendar becomes invisible. Okay. And another thing to notice is that when I select, look at this, at the moment we have 15 of September 2024, and if I select 16, the date is properly selected. If I select 16, the date is properly selected and the calendar become invisible as well. So that problem is also solved, properly, populating the text box control with the date that we have selected in the calendar, and how to retrieve the selected date from the custom calendar on a web form. Again, it is pretty much easy. Now we have selected date property. Where is the selected date property? Now we have selected date property, so I can say, what is the ID of this one? What is the ID of this one? What is the ID of this one? I think custom calendar 1. I think custom calendar 1 is the ID. So let's take that. And within the button click event, all we need to do is custom calendar 1. And if you remember, the property is selected date dot to string. So let's go ahead, selected date dot to string. So let's go ahead and says response dot write. So let's go ahead, says response dot write. So let's go ahead and say response.write. In reality, we may save it to the database or do whatever you want to with that property. So let's run this now and look at this. And now let's run this now. And look at this. I have 15 September 2024. I have 15 September 2024 selected. I click that button. I get that date. Okay. Basically, I have not converted it to short date string. If you converted it to short date string, you will only get the date part of that. Okay. So if I select 26, click the button. So if I select 26, where is it, 26? Click the button. I get 26 September of 2024. Now there is one problem with this, calendar control still at the moment. Now there is one problem with this, calendar control still at the moment. Now look at this in the image button click. Where is the image button click? Here it is. In the image button click, when we click the image button at the moment, now look at this in the image button click. When we click the image button at the moment, if the calendar is not visible, we are making it visible. If it is already visible, then we turning off the visibility. Okay. But one thing that we need to do is let's say, let me run this project once again. Let me run this project once again. Now let's say I have the date as 01/01/1940. Now let's say 01/01/1940, and then I click this image button. Look at this. It is currently showing September 2024. Now instead of that, I actually want to show whatever date that I have typed in here, because let's say if I want to change the date from 01/01/1940 to 01/01/02/1940, maybe January 2nd, 1940. Now just imagine how many clicks. Would it take to navigate? Back to year 1940? Okay, so to solve the problem, I have code snippet here. So what are we doing here? Go to the notepad, and I have the code snippet here. And what are we doing? Now the calendar is visible. Turn the visibility to false. That is fine. But on the other hand, if it is not visible, then we need to turn the visibility on. But when I am turning the visibility on, so look at this, I am setting the visibility to true. But then I am also checking. If the text box is not null. If the text box is not null or empty, then set the visibility date. Then set the visible date. Of the calendar to today. I mean, if it is empty, set the visible date today. Else, if it is not empty, then we know there is something within the text box. So first I am declaring a variable of date time. A variable of date time as output. And I am initializing that to today. And then look at what I am doing here. I am using this try parse method. To convert whatever text that I have in the text box. To date time. If that conversion is successful, I am using this variable. To convert that, whatever text we have in the text box, to date time, to date time. Date time data type, and then put that, and then put that within the output variable, and then put that within the variable. Okay, within this output variable. Okay, output variable. So today's date will be, changed to whatever date that we have in the text box, whatever date that we have in the text box control, text box control. On the other hand, if the conversion is not successful, what happens? The try pass method will return false. Okay, if it is not successful, then the output has today. The output has today date. Okay, so basically two things will happen if there is text within text box control. If there is text within their text box control, meaning somebody has entered some data, some date within the text box. What this else part will try to do, it will try to convert that date time. We'll try to convert that date time if the conversion is successful. In this sense, if I have entered a valid date time, then the conversion will be successful, and that date will be stored in this, output variable, which is then assigned to the variable date, visible date, which is then assigned to visible date property of the calendar. So basically let's change the image button click event handler to have this code instead of that straightforward code. So let me copy this and go to the coding. And look at the moment. If you look at this image button click, it is pretty simple and straightforward. All we are doing here is, if the calendar is visible, turn the visibility to false. Otherwise, it is not visible. Turn the visibility to true. Instead of that, I am going to paste this piece of code that we have copied from the notepad. Paste that code here. Okay. So let's rebuild this. Let's rebuild this. And let's go to the web project where we are testing this. And let's go to the web project where we are testing this. Let me remove the references. Remove the references. Remove the reference to the register directive and then the custom control itself. Remove this custom control itself. Let's remove the assembly from the toolbox. So right click, choose items. And uncheck custom calendar. And uncheck, where is the custom calendar? Uncheck the custom calendar. Click OK. Just to be safe, remove the reference from the reference folder. Just to be safe, remove the reference from the reference folder. And clean these solutions. Clean the solution. Rebuild the solution. Just to make sure, let's actually check, if we still have that particular custom control assembly. I don't want that to be there. So we don't have the assembly there. Okay. In the bin folder, we don't have that assembly there. And then obviously we get an error. So remove this, comment it. So we had the error there. Because custom calendar is not there, because we have error there because we don't have the custom calendar there. Let's comment that. We have comment that for the time being. Okay, let's go ahead and re-add the custom calendar control. Let's re-add the custom calendar control. So choose item. And before we do that, let's actually rebuild the custom controls project. Let's rebuild the custom control project, rebuild solution. So this is the custom control project, rebuild all successful. Let's flip back to the ASP.NET project. Click the browse button. And within C drive, navigate to user, Dell, desktop, and folder part 112. Custom controls, again custom control obj debug, and there is the generated assembly custom controls.ddl. So select this. So select this. Click OK. That should add the custom calendar. So that should add the custom calendar. So let's drag and drop that onto the web form. Drag and drop it onto the web form. So we have that. Let's also set the image button, image URL property. So let's also set the image button, image URL property, that is going to be images /calendar.jpg, which should pick up. And let's go ahead and run this as itself. Run this as it stands now. Let's go ahead and run this as it stands now. Now I am going to change the date within the text box. Directly by hand. Now I am going to change the date within the text box directly by hand to something 1940. So 1/1 1940. 1/1/1940. Okay, so now look at this. If I click this and click the image button when the calendar shows up, it should check the content of this text box. Now this is not empty. Okay, look at this. If it is going to be empty, if I click the, so if it is going to be empty, if I click this image button, it is going to show us today's date and time. Okay, so September 2024. Now on the other hand, if I have text there, let me turn off the calendar visibility. Let's have today's date. So there is some text within that. So I click that button. Look at that, it is now showing January 1940. Means I typed it here 1/1/1940. If I click that image button, look at that, it is now showing January 1940. Okay, so the user, if he wants to select 2nd of January of 1940, it is simple and straightforward. So if I select, so It is simple and straightforward. So that is what this property actually doing. So that is what this property is doing. Here, the else part. Here, this else part. Here, all right. So in this video we discuss about solving all these problems. In our next video we will discuss about adding an event to our custom control. It is actually very similar to adding events to user controls. We have discussed about user controls in the previous session of this video series, so you can check those videos as well. So in our next video we will discuss about adding events to our custom control. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.